Hey, good morning. Today is Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. This is Wes Fryer, and I want to talk about courage in the face of violence. We are living in some extremely trying and difficult times. As I record this on June 11th, we are just days away from what I think is going to be a historic and very important day of protest in the United States. This Saturday, June 14th, if you're not aware, not only is Flag Day, but it has also been declared No Kings Day, because here in the United States, we do not have kings. We don't support kings. We have a president. We have a constitutional government that limits power and shares power, not only through three branches of government, but in a federalist system that delegates power and authority at different levels. Certain powers are reserved to the states. Certain things are allowed for the federal government. It's high school civics 101. But unfortunately, we are in a situation and in a moment where some of our leaders are not following the law, and people are taking to the streets to protest. And it's under this banner of No Kings. I think what I want to encourage all of us to do first is find out what kinds of activities are happening. Nonviolent protest is so important. I am almost 55 years old. I was born in 1970. I did not live through the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I was born after the assassinations of President Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, many leaders, many people in the civil rights movement. But of course, we have had violence in other forms, and we've had multiple acts of police violence. One of the most notable was certainly George Floyd. That happened several years ago. We were living in Oklahoma, and having courage in the face of violence is not something new for many communities. But for some of us that have lived a more sheltered life, and we have lived in a political moment that has not been as filled with the images of physical violence, which are a part of our world and our society. As I record this, in June of 2011, we continue to have active wars happening right now. The war in the Ukraine has been going on for 2 years. The war in Gaza has been going on, and for a variety of reasons, and I think some of these were things that really happened during the first Gulf War. I was at the Air Force Academy during what we consider to be the first Gulf War in Iraq. And one of the lessons that the government and that government officials learned out of the Vietnam conflict was it was extremely dangerous for them to allow unfettered access of the media to the battlefield, because when people are seeing these images of the realities of warfare on the screen night after night, and my parents certainly did that, that has a very powerful cumulative effect on the psychology of people, particularly of people living in a constitutional republic. And the anti-war movement and the anti-war protests in the 1960s or in the Vietnam War ultimately led to a lot of things, but it included the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Vietnam and Southeast Asia overall and the end of those hostilities. I'm saying we've lived in a very censored media environment in some respects, but we also now live in a day of social media. And I don't want to get too far afield. We need to find out what's happening. Here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live, we have a local branch of a nationwide organization that is called Indivisible. Google that. Google Indivisible. Indivisible, as I understand it, is one of the primary organizers of the No Kings protests that are happening this weekend. Now, this isn't a new organization. I actually was able to meet over Zoom yesterday with two of the founders of our Charlotte Indivisible organization, and they've been They've been at work since 2017, I think for 7.5 years. And so the efforts to support free and fair elections, to end gerrymandering, to try and empower people to participate in the political process and to do so in an open and fair way, that's been a struggle that's been ongoing for a long time. But did I get away from this road? I'm sorry. I'm sure that's loud. Yeah, I should have waited to start my little live stream here. As I record this, again, on June 11th, let me talk about what I mean by courage in the face of violence. I absolutely hope that I am wrong about this, but I think that we are on the edge of seeing violence in the streets of our country, in the United States, most specifically in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., than widespread violence that we haven't seen in quite a while. Now, there have been the Rodney King riots in the early 90s. I think that was the last time that maybe the National Guard was mobilized by a president. And this is not something that we've seen a lot of. What I think we need to do is be courageous. We have in the United States a constitutional right to peacefully assemble. We have a constitutionally provided freedom of speech. Yesterday, our president, current president, spoke at what had been renamed Fort Liberty. It's now been renamed again back to Fort Bragg. And he, among a number of things that the president said yesterday, not only in his speech there in front of soldiers, but also elsewhere, he threatened and warned Americans that if anybody would protest his birthday party and the military parade, which is supposed to cost $45 million, that's scheduled for Washington, D.C. on Saturday, that they would be met with very strong force. Again, I didn't live through the 60s and the civil rights movement, but as I have studied and tried to learn from what happened and what the leadership of our civil rights movement, how they organized, what they did, preparation and training for nonviolent protest and nonviolent resistance was so important. The role of the media was actually really important too, right? It was huge that millions of people across the United States saw images from the South, from Alabama, from other places, when white police forces and security forces turned water cannons and dogs and mounted police on these nonviolent protesters. We have a variety of different ways that we influence government in the United States. And voting is very important. And I know there's a lot of people today, and I'm concerned about it too, worried geopolitically about China and about North Korea and Iran and Russia and about a variety of different state actors. But I am 100% convinced that one of the most important things we need to do is figure out governance and show that we can do this. We need to be a peaceful and respectful multiracial democracy. We have been founded as a nation on this idea of no kings. Again, that's what Saturday is about, June 14th, 2025, no King's Day. We, dating back to the Magna Carta in the 1200s, have a history, we have an ancestry, we have a political heritage that calls back centuries. And of course, we're not perfect and we've never been perfect, but we're striving to, that's what it means to be a more perfect union. We're striving to be a country that represents the people, that limits the power of individuals, and that puts in place checks and balances so that individuals and small groups are not able to seize power and maintain that power and then use that power for personal enrichment and to oppress others. Justice, that is a really hard and often elusive concept and idea, but it's real. And one of the key elements of our government that we have is something called the separation of powers, checks and balances. And one of the ways that we do that is through the voice of the people. So, wherever you happen to be, I want to encourage you, number one, to have courage and to have hope, because what we can see right now on social media can be incredibly disorienting. It can be incredibly depressing. I teach middle school. I'm a middle school media literacy and STEM teacher. And one of the things that I feel responsible to do is to stay current with the ways in which media information is being shared. News literacy, where we get our news, who our trusted voices are, who we listen to. That's gigantically important because the folks we listen to define our perceptions and they define our reality. Well, I do not go on this every day, and I have not posted a whole ton. The stuff I've posted has been barbecue and Bible verses mainly. But I have an account on Truth Social, and Truth Social, if you don't know, is the social network that our current president has created, and the far-right extremists who are calling for not only mass deportations of folks who are here in the United States illegally, but not just calling for them to be deported through a process, through due process, a legal process, but for mass deportations, but they're also calling for violence. Yesterday, I opened my Truth Social app, and there's a discovery tab or search tab or whatever, what's trending, what's hot, just like Twitter or X has. And I debated whether I wanted to show that and document it because, folks, it's horrific. It is, people are not only calling for deportation, they're calling for violence. There are folks who've written books and done TED Talks about this, that we have a number of people in our country with firearms who unfortunately are not only angry, but they want to use their firearms against our fellow countrymen, citizens, the folks that live in our country. We need to maintain hope. We need to recognize that living as we do in a very polarized society, the reality that people are perceiving today can be very different. And the decisions that we make are important. I think that there's a long game and an immediate short game. And part of the short game, and it's not a game, the present and future of our country and governance. And this ripples through the world because the United States has been an important and continues to be an important example to the people of the world of how despotism, fascism, dictatorship, authoritarianism are not only the only game in town when it comes to government, but that's not the choice that we should want to make. We should want to live in a representative democracy that supports human rights and finds ways to compromise and finds ways to govern when an individual doesn't just have fiat power to decide to do whatever they want. President Trump has sent 2,000 troops to Los Angeles, who I think are Army troops. He's also decided to supplement that with 700 Marines from Camp Pendleton. The United States military, active troops like this, are not trained in crowd control and are not actually equipped to handle the kinds of situations that we're talking about with street protests. Police officers and different kinds of security forces are, but if you're not aware, the provocation or the catalyst for what has happened in California this last week are that ostensibly federal agents representing ICE were in full tactical gear, with masks on, with helmets, without visible badges, and they were showing up at places like Home Depot and other places and arresting people who were suspected of being illegal here in the United States. So the people of California, and specifically in Los Angeles, have every right, we all do, to be very upset about this, because that is not the behavior of a constitutional government. Okay, agents of a constitutional government display badges, they have warrants, they have permission, and then they don't do this. Okay, so the actions that federal agencies are taking right now are intentionally provocational. They're intentionally designed to provoke. And so what we need to do is be very careful and try not to be provoked. It is certainly possible that at some of these protests around the country, there will be people who are going to be violent. There's lots of angry people, but I think that we need to have courage in the face of violence, in the face of prospective violence, because these issues are really big and they're really important, and we each have roles to play. I do think that we can resist with media and in documenting things, in also amplifying and sharing. We need to help educate. We need to be educating ourselves and helping educate others to make sense of what's happening. What's happening in the United States, unfortunately, is a fascist takeover of our government. When the chief executive says that anyone who even protests, and that's a peaceful protest or a violent protest. And by the way, I am opposed to violent protest. I think that we need to use peaceful protest and the power of the media and the power of our numbers as people in order to affect change. But when the chief executive says anybody who protests my birthday party and 80 Abrams M1A1 tanks that are going to be in the streets of DC and this whole projection of power, if anybody protests this at all, they're going to be met with strong force. Okay? That is the statement of a fascist. That is absolutely over the line. And this isn't something that just started yesterday. This has been happening for quite a while. But we have different moments that can sometimes really catalyze people and can really help turn the light bulb on. And particularly, I think, for those of us that have served in uniform and are veterans, we are very sensitive to the ways in which the military is employed overall. And the United States military, we have this thing called the Posse Comitatus Act, except in extreme cases of a land invasion. And by the way, having millions of undocumented people here in the United States does not constitute a military invasion. We absolutely need to change our immigration laws and procedures and do a better job handling immigration, no question. But having armed security forces in black tactical gear showing up in shopping areas and just arresting people and abducting them, that's called kidnapping, okay? That's not called arresting people because of probable cause through due process. And so those kinds of actions can't stand. The people who are promulgating these, the people who have authorized these kinds of actions, like what we've seen in California this week, need to face justice themselves, all right? Because when you have power in the United States or in any country, all right, that power absolutely must be checked and limited. And so that, I guess I'll wrap it up because I've been maybe going too long here. But this is a responsibility that we have as citizens. We have a responsibility to not be silent. Probably all of us remember studying something about World War II at some point in our history. We remember learning about the ways in which Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party took power. And that story, unfortunately, includes the seizure of power through what was initially democratic means, because the Nazi Party, what became the Nazi Party, was elected in Nazi Germany. In fact, there's a really good Atlantic article that was published yesterday on June 10th, 2025, and it details that history of how a purported riot and purported violence was used by Hitler to consolidate power and to eventually impose a police state, martial law, and take complete control. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope that this weekend is a weekend filled with the gathering of peaceful citizens in the United States and others who are here to protest the actions of not only our president, but many agents of our president. And I hope that we're going to have a really powerful weekend message sent to the corridors of power that the people in the United States are not going to lie down. We're not going to just allow our constitutional freedoms, our freedom to assemble and to have speech, but also our freedom from fear. Like, no one, no matter how we look, nobody should fear walking into a courtroom, walking into a Home Depot, and think that agents of the government are going to jump out in black tactical gear, arrest and kidnap us. Okay? That is ridiculous. And hopefully we're going to send a strong message, and ultimately it's going to take all of us in order to move through this season and get to a more sane condition of governance where we don't have extremists who want to do things like turn the U.S. military against the American people in the streets with protest. I'm not sure what the full formula is to prepare ourselves for potential images of violence and the reality of violence. I have been debating myself whether I wanted to participate, because there is a real risk today whenever we go to large gatherings. My wife and I were at the Love and Life conference in Uptown Charlotte here at the end of May. I won some tickets, and there were thousands of people there. And there was a sharpshooter on the rooftop of one of the surrounding buildings, and police forces were there with their AR weapons. And I am glad that we had visible police presence and that the police were there to protect the people. And I'm also glad that there wasn't an incident. But anytime we have a gathering, especially a large gathering, there are risks. And I just think that to the degree possible, we should prepare and steel ourselves for the possibility that we're going to be witnesses, either in person, face to face, or via media for violence. The other thing we really need to do is recognize that there are almost certainly going to be images shared which have been created by AI, which are fake, which are not real, and which are going to be designed to inflame passions and get people upset and mad. And this is why I teach the SIFT web literacy framework to my students, where when we encounter something that really brings about an emotional response, the S is for stop, the I is for investigate the source, the F is for find trusted coverage, and the T is trace to the original. It takes some time to do that with media messages coming from war zones or from street protests or from all kinds of things. And I think it's going to be challenging, but let's maintain hope, and let's remember that there are so many good people. And this is, I think, the story I'll end with. So my wife and I went camping this last week up in Cherokee, North Carolina, which is in western North Carolina. It's almost on the Tennessee border. And we were up there for 3 days. The last night we were there, I wanted to cook shrimp and grits, but I had forgotten to bring flour. And I had my little measuring cup, and I went and met some of our neighbors. And I finally found somebody that had some flour and loaned it to me. But I ended up meeting some wonderful people, some kind people. And it was a reminder to me of how many good people there are in this world. Whenever we have some kind of a natural disaster or some kind of a crisis, we hear about and we see, and often we experience neighbors coming together to help each other. And it's building community, finding ways to not be isolated and alone, to not marinate too long in the news cycle, and to maintain our hope. The United States has been, and I believe will continue to be, a beacon of hope for millions of people, not only today, but throughout history. We are a super young country. We're not even 300 years old. And what we're living through today is a very challenging time, but it's an important time, and we need to maintain our hope. We need to build our community. We need to strive to make connections that are going to help us, not only for today and this weekend, but in the long run. Find the trusted voices that we want to listen to and work together peacefully, non-violently, to find ways that we're going to be able to live with each other and not just tolerate each other, but we're going to be able to thrive together in a multiracial democracy, which is what we have in the United States. And there are lots of different folks with lots of different ideas about how we should govern and what we should do. And I'm thankful that the individuals that wrote our founding documents, they had some good ideas, but they also had some, there were a lot of issues, and there's a lot of ways that we've moved forward, and we need to keep moving forward, and we can do that together. No King's Day. It's this Saturday. I hope that you'll consider how you'll participate. And it's not a time to be passive and silent. It's a time for us to not only speak up, but act out as well. And to do that together in community with others in our neighborhoods and our communities that share our values and believe that here in the United States, we don't suffer kings. Have a great day.